Hi, and welcome to the 10 square metre workshop. Last time I built not the Dudley tool chest, the Dudley tool chest. And I'm keen to get on and put some tools into it. But hang on a minute. At the moment the front doors are just flapping in the breeze, there's nothing to hold them closed. So I really ought to get on with some catches and a lock. The proper furniture for such a toolbox. You can't buy such things, so guess I gotta make it. I really enjoy making these brass fittings. Starting point here is some 19mm brass bar. Firstly, it's in the lathe for facing off. Now I want a 6mm hole. So I centre drill it, then drill out 5mm. Before continuing, I'm going to part it to length. And so I part it at 60mm. And yes, I should have done that before drilling the hole. Well, parted off now and inserted, I shall complete the hole. After the 5mm comes the 5.9. And finally the 6mm reamer. I now have my blank for milling. The first task in the milling machine is to take 4.5mm of one face. I'm doing it in this orientation because it's easy to set the height. That flat is now 2mm from the edge of the 6mm hole wall. I can now use that flat to locate it sideways in order to take another 3.5mm of a face square to that one. With that done, I can now cut the side relief out further 1.5mm from one side. And with that done, I can turn it over and do the same on the other side. Like so. Time to finish the fourth side. I shall take this one carefully. I have a limited bearing surface to camp it with. 4.5mm off that side, and I have my profile formed. I then machined away the central core on both ends. To produce this shape, the next step was to put a slot in what would become the top face, followed by a smaller slot at the far end, and then disaster struck. Countersinking the second screw hole, it caught and went straight through. Scrap it? I've invested too much time in this. I made a tiny plug which I'll insert and braze. I brazed it from the back, which means the front is barely discoloured. Just got to machine that off now. Re-drilled and cleaned up, it's not really possible to tell that it's been through the walls. The locking piece I made from 3x9mm bar. Turned the locking bolt down to 6mm, and now I need to make the finger catch out of this piece of quarter brass. As is so often the case, it starts in the mill. I don't need to find the position because it's going to be overall machined. First touch to find the rear. Engage a light cut. And zero my y-axis. Across to the other side. I can approach the setting that means 6mm wide. I did the same for the length, so it's now 13 by 6. Set up horizontally, I can now face off the end. This also gives me the edge position, so I now can machine in exactly 6mm. Sorry, slip of the tongue. I didn't mean exactly, I meant accurately. World of difference. It's now 7mm down. Shifting to a centre drill, I can now put a hole in the middle of that feature. And drill it out 3mm. I then counterboard the back to take a 3mm bolt head. This allows the two parts to be screwed together. Now a bit of hand fitting to round off those corners until it starts looking like this. After a bit more fettling, it operates correctly, so I can now cut off that machining spur. The operating snib might end up flush or slightly proud. I'll decide that after installation. A major part of the design was that it should be easy to install. I'll make a pencil line where the door reaches, and then I line that up with a slot from the catch and mark it into position. First I got it fitting flush upside down and then flush. I'm going to get the joining plate in first before I put the guts in. First I mark out where it goes. I've deliberately made the tongue too long at this stage. Depth is critical and I intend creeping up on it. With the lock in place, I'll measure the gap to be 2mm, so I'll extend the mortise. Doing that means it's now a snug fit. Time to add the screws. And so, after a few seconds to you and a few hours to me, the second catch is in place. The first step in making the lock is to make the case, which I'm making out of 1mm, 1.5mm and 4.5mm brass, as you can see. The first task is to cut the 6 parts, slightly oversize, on the bandsaw. 3 of the parts have the same thickness, so after milling one face of each of them individually, I could mount all 3 together in the vise and machine them to a constant height. 9mm in this case. The 2 1mm side plates could also be machined as a pair, leaving the front 1.5mm piece to be machined alone. With the major parts cut to size, it's time to cut all the holes and slots needed. The back is the easiest. It just takes 2 2.5mm bolts to hold it to the rest of the frame. I shall machine it to length at the same time, 66mm. The first end I just take a passing cut, which smooths the end and gives me the reference for how far in to come. I first use the edge of the vise and the edge finder to establish my white position. I then come in with a 6mm centre drill. The inner size of this is 2.5mm, just right for the clearance hole, so I can do it all in one operation. Of course I made sure my parallels were not in the way. I drilled the second hole at the same time. It's a simple traverse and ensures accuracy. And then machined to length. First piece finished. The top and bottom pieces have 4 holes in them each, 1 on each end and 2 through the side face. Here I'm doing them both together. All these holes are then tapped 2.5mm. The side plates have a few more holes, plus a slot for the key. The last part, the front plate, has a more complicated set of cuts. I'm hand filing the slots in the front plate square. A few strokes with a big file, then a needle file, and the job's done. And with the case made, I'm ready to make the works. The first of these is the key pin, which is a simple turning job. It's what the key pivots on. This is a press fit into the frame and is then riveted over. I don't have any 14x9 brass material, so I'll machine it from this piece of 90mm rod. First to flatten one side, then flip it over to do the other side. Machine to the needed 9mm thick. Then it's on its side for the next face, and with that face square I can flip it for the final one, down to 14mm. And with that done, my blank is made. After cutting in 2, the billet was test fitted into the frame. The crank for the handle I'm making by offsetting it in a 3-jaw chuck, then boring it. Drilling 5mm tapping size. And tapping it 5mm left hand thread, for reasons it will become obvious. Because of the difficulty of holding the piece for the second bearing, I'm going to try doing both using a parting tool. Yes, yes, I can hear you purists cry. Having turned the end down to 8mm and checked it with the plate, as you can see, I now have a DRO setting for the other side. With that done, I can move over a little and part it off. This is the resulting piece, ready to be milled away. First step in forming the catch is to drill a long 6mm hole into the back. This, fitted with a spring and plunger, gives the return system for the catch. The cam was roughed out in the mill before hand finishing to the final shape, with an engaging slot for the cam cut and the front beveled off for closing. The latch is now finished. And here's how it works. The two sliding parts require guides to stop them moving, that one moving up, that one moving down, and this rotating part needs a stop. I'm going to make all three in one. I turned off this bit of 19mm bar, just under 9mm thick. So I mill 2mm off one side and 2mm off the other, and I have the 15mm separation I need. Now for the stop part. I chose the angle for this freehand. It's not critical. I think I got it pretty close. Next job was to drill through that 2mm hole in the middle of the disc. I'm doing this handheld, but with some support on the side. This new hole in the frame was then drilled out 2.5mm and countersunk, and the hole in the block tapped 2.5 metric. And here it is in place, doing its job. I can't get much further without making the key, so that's the next job. First turn down this 1/4 inch bar to 5mm. With that done, I can part it off and I have the shaft of the key. I need a slot in each end to hold the ward and handle. I shall just do this using a hacksaw. This was then opened up with a needle file. With a piece of 2mm brass in the slot, I'm ready to braze in the ward. I can't do the other end yet, because after brazing it and cleaning up the end, I need to put it back in the lathe so I can drill the pinhole. Having milled a slot in the bolt, right there, the key now operates the bolt. One way and the other. I of course need something to stop the bolt moving from the two ends, but I'll finish the key first. With another square of 2mm brass brazed on the back, I can start shaping it. A bit of shaping and a few minutes on the Scotch-Brite, and I have a fairly decent key. I shall make the detent mechanism using this piece of 9.5mm bar. Centre drilled, then 2.5mm, then 6mm to a depth of 14, and then parted off with 16. With 1/2 taken off the width so it will fit in, it goes in here. I drilled and tapped a 2.5mm hole in the bottom, so that the bolt can go through the centre of this new part and into the bottom. The tube contains a spring, a 6mm ball bearing, which bears into the little dimples in the bolt, locking into one of two positions. The knob I'm turning out a piece of old propeller shaft, bronze. As you can see, I've turned the shaft and put a 5mm left hand thread on it. It's left hand thread because otherwise turning the knob would loosen it. This way it will tighten it. After turning and parting, it was reversed in the chuck to tidy up the most visible part, the top. Using the edge of the tool, I formed a slight dome. It's a matter of keep moving it and adjusting until it forms a dome shape. You wouldn't want to try such form turning on steel, but on brass or bronze it works very well. A few minutes on the buff, the result is a mirror finish. The lock receiver plate, can't remember the proper name, was milled out in the same way as the other plate. Gripping the part is a little more problematical due to that strike plate, but the dimensions are not critical for this. By taking careful cuts, I was able to make the first lot hanging out, as it were. The second one was somewhat easier. A bit more fettling and I have a working lock, ready to fit. And with an engraved lock plate, here's a sneak preview of the catch in place. Well, that's the tool chest in a workable form. Now I can get on with installing the tools. Well, that'll be next time. See you then.